The night was silent in the ruined alien marketplace. Once this place had been full of life, with bright lights and busy voices. Now it was broken, dark, and cold. Empty stalls stood like skeletons, and the air smelled of dust and smoke. A human traveler walked carefully between the shadows, carrying a small pack of food. He was tired after a long journey across the strange city, but his sharp eyes stayed alert. In this place, hunger was everywhere and danger could hide behind every corner. He stopped near an old stone pillar to rest. The human set down his pack beside him and leaned against the cracked wall. For a moment he closed his eyes. That was when he heard it, soft, quick steps on the ground. His eyes opened sharply and his hand reached for the pack, but it was gone. Someone had taken it. The human spun around and saw a small figure running through the shadows. The thief moved fast, but the pack of food slowed the little body down. The human's instincts took over. Without a word, he chased after the figure. His boot struck the broken ground hard, echoing in the night. The figure darted between fallen beams and broken stalls, trying to escape. The human pushed forward. He was taller, stronger, and faster. Still, the thief knew these streets better. The chase twisted through narrow alleys filled with the smell of decay. At one corner, the figure slipped, almost falling, but quickly caught balance and kept running. The human was now only a few steps behind. Finally, under a flickering streetlight, the thief stumbled and fell. The pack dropped to the ground with a dull thud. The human rushed forward, ready to grab the food back, but then he stopped. It was not a hardened criminal. It was a child. The alien boy looked no older than 10. His thin body shook as he pulled, the pack close to his chest. His skin was pale with hunger, his big dark eyes full of fear. The boy's hands trembled so badly that he could barely hold the food. His clothes were torn and his bare feet were cut from running across broken glass and stone. The human froze, his anger fading into shock. A starving child had stolen from him. He looked at the boy, who now tried to crawl backward, clutching the bag as if it were life itself. "Please," the child whispered in a weak, broken voice. It was not in the human's language, but the meaning was clear. The human slowly knelt, his eyes steady. He did not reach for the bag. Instead, he studied the boy, trying to understand. The boy's stomach growled loudly. His face showed both shame and desperation. This was no thief by choice. This was survival. But then, something else caught the human's attention. The boy was not eating the food. Even though he was clearly starving, he pressed the pack against his chest as if it was meant for someone else. The human's suspicion grew. Why would a starving child not eat? Why would he protect the food like a treasure instead of tearing it open? The boy stood shakily, still holding the pack, and glanced back into the darkness. Then he ran again, deeper into the ruins. This time, the human did not chase with anger. He followed with curiosity and a growing sense of unease. He could have taken the bag back easily, but something told him there was more to this story. The boy led him down a narrow path between broken walls. The sound of dripping water echoed through the silence. Strange symbols were carved on the stones, long forgotten. The air grew colder, and the human felt the weight of sadness all around. Finally, the boy slipped through a small doorway of a collapsed building. The human stopped just outside, his breath steady. Slowly, he stepped inside. The room was dark, lit only by a faint glow from a broken lamp. Dust floated in the air like ghosts. And there, in the corner, lay a figure on the ground. It was a woman, an alien mother. Her body was thin, her face pale and exhausted. She looked too weak to even sit up. The child rushed to her side, kneeling and placing the bag of food near her. His small hand shook her shoulder gently. "Mother," the boy whispered. The human stood silently in the shadows, his heart heavy. He realized the truth. The boy had not stolen for himself. He had stolen to save his mother. The human clenched his fists, emotions rising inside him. Hunger, pain, desperation. It was written on both their faces. In that moment, he understood that this was not about theft. This was about survival, about love between a child and his mother, and so the human stayed, watching the fragile scene. A choice waited in his heart, to walk away or to step forward and change everything. The night was silent, but the story had only just begun. The boy's small hands clung tightly to the food pack. His arms shook as he pressed it against his mother's chest. She tried to move, but her strength was gone. Her eyes half opened, filled with pain and emptiness. She whispered something in a weak alien tongue, a sound so soft that even the human could barely hear it. The child leaned closer, nodding quickly as if to tell her, "I brought it. I brought help." The human stood a few steps away, his shadow long against the broken wall. He had seen hunger before. He had seen children cry in the ashes of war, and he had seen soldiers fall in battle. But this was different. This was raw, silent desperation. A boy risking his life for a mother who could barely breathe. The boy opened the bag with shaking hands. Inside were dried ration bars. Nothing special, but to him they were priceless. He broke a small piece and lifted it to his mother's lips. She tried to chew, but the effort was too much. She coughed weakly, and her head fell back against the wall. The boy's wide eyes filled with tears. His thin shoulders trembled, but he did not cry out. Instead, he turned the food away from himself and kept pressing it gently to her lips. He was starving, yet he refused to take even a bite. His only thought was to save her. The human took one slow step forward. The boy spun around, his eyes wild with fear. He hugged the bag close, standing protectively in front of his mother. His body was small, his legs weak, but his stance was unshakable. He shouted in his alien tongue, his voice thin but full of fire. The words were unknown, but the meaning was clear. "Stay away. She is mine to protect." The human raised his hand slowly, showing he carried no weapon. His voice was calm, steady. "I will not hurt you," he said softly. The boy's chest rose and fell quickly, his breath sharp like knives. He did not understand the human's words, but he saw something in his eyes, something different from the cruel stares of the city guards or the greedy looks of merchants who had turned them away. The human's gaze was steady, kind, almost protective. Still, the boy shook his head and pressed himself closer to his mother. The human stayed where he was, lowering himself to sit on the ground. He did not move closer. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out another small bar of food, one he had hidden earlier. Slowly, he set it down in the dust between them and slid it forward. The boy's eyes widened. His small hands tightened around the stolen bag. His stomach growled loudly, the sound echoing in the quiet room. But even then, he did not reach for the human's gift. He looked back at his mother, then back at the human. Distrust burned inside him. The human did not push. He simply nodded once and stayed still like a stone. His mind whispered that this was no ordinary child. This was a fighter, a survivor. Even in fear, he guarded his mother with the courage of someone far older. Minutes passed. The silence was heavy. Then, finally, the boy crouched slowly and reached for the extra food bar. His fingers shook as he picked it up. He sniffed it, checked it with suspicious eyes, then broke a small piece and placed it in his mother's mouth. The woman swallowed, weakly. For the first time, her eyes flickered open with a faint light. The boy's lips trembled as relief washed over him. He clutched her hand tightly, whispering words only she could understand. The human exhaled quietly. He had seen enough. He knew now, this was not about food or theft. This was about love and survival in a world that had abandoned them. The boy finally looked back at the human. His eyes were still sharp, but now they carried something else. Confusion, maybe even a trace of hope. The human pointed gently at the bag. Then he pointed at the boy's mouth, motioning for him to eat too. The boy shook his head fiercely. He pushed the food toward his mother again, as if to say, She first. Always her first. The human's chest tightened. A lump formed in his throat. He had seen soldiers sacrifice for their comrades, but never had he seen a starving child refuse food just to keep his mother alive. The boy's strength began to fade. His small body swayed, his knees trembling. He was beyond exhausted. Finally, his mother, weak but conscious for a moment, touched his arm. Her hand shook as she guided the food toward him. Her cracked lips moved slowly, whispering one word, a mother's command. The boy's eyes filled with tears. He obeyed. He bit into the ration, small and careful, as if ashamed to take it. The human watched silently. Something inside him changed in that moment. He had started the night as a traveler, protecting his food and his own life. But now he felt something else awaken. A duty. A bond. A promise that had not yet been spoken. The boy finally sank down beside his mother, clutching her hand tightly. His body leaned against hers, small and fragile, but his spirit unbroken. His eyes closed, but even in sleep, his grip did not loosen. The human sat there in the silence, staring at them. He knew then. He could not walk away. This was not just their fight anymore. It was his too. And as the night grew colder, a decision formed inside him, one that would change all of their lives forever. The silence inside the ruined shelter grew heavier as the night stretched on. Dust drifted in the dim light like tiny ghosts, and the cracked walls whispered with the sound of the cold wind outside. The human sat near the doorway, his back against the stone, watching the boy and his mother. The boy had fallen into a restless sleep, his small body curled beside her. His hand, still clutching hers, showed how deep his fear of losing her was. The mother's eyes opened slowly. They were weak, but there was something sharp inside them, something that had not been broken yet. She turned her gaze toward the human. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Her breath was shallow, but her stare asked the question her lips could not. Why are you here? The human lowered his head slightly, showing respect. He did not try to speak in words she might not understand. Instead, he tapped his chest once, a silent promise. He was not their enemy. Her eyes softened for a moment, then closed again. Hours passed. The boy stirred awake, rubbing his eyes. He looked at the human, his body tense at first, then calm when he saw the food bar lying untouched beside the man. The boy seemed to understand. The human was not here to take anything away. The boy whispered something to his mother, then stood up carefully. He motioned to the human with a small hand, pointing deeper into the ruins. At first, the human did not move, unsure what the boy wanted. But then he realized this child wanted him to follow. They stepped into the narrow hall of the collapsed building. The boy moved quickly but quietly, his bare feet making no sound on the cold stone. The human followed, his eyes scanning the shadows. Every corner felt heavy with the weight of forgotten lives. The hall led into a small chamber. Broken furniture lay in pieces and the smell of mold clung to the air. In one corner was a pile of thin cloths and old scraps. This was their bed. Nearby, a small jar of water stood half empty. The boy pointed at it, then at his stomach, and shook his head. Not enough. The human crouched, studying the space. This was more than a hiding place. It was their home, their last refuge against a world that had abandoned them. The boy looked proud for a moment, as if showing his world to a trusted guest. But that pride quickly faded, replaced by shame. He lowered his head as if embarrassed by the poverty that surrounded him. The human placed a hand on the boy's shoulder gently. No words, just a small sign that he understood. There was no shame here, only survival. The boy's sharp eyes flickered again. He pointed at the wall, then tapped the ground twice, as though explaining something. The human leaned closer. Behind the broken stones, he noticed faint marks, scratches, drawings carved with desperate hands. The shapes were simple but clear, figures of a family, a house, a son. Memories carved into the wall so they would not be forgotten. The human touched the carving softly. The boy's eyes filled with tears, but he did not cry. He only stood taller, guarding those marks as if they were treasures. The silence broke, when a sound echoed from outside, the clank of metal, the shuffle of heavy boots. The boy froze. His whole body stiffened, his breath quick and sharp. He rushed to the doorway, peering out through a crack in the broken stone. The human followed, his senses sharpening. Out in the street, under the pale glow of a flickering lamp, two figures walked slowly. Alien guards, their armor scratched but still shining, carried long weapons. Their voices were rough as they spoke in low tones. They were searching. The boy pulled back, his face pale. He pressed his finger to his lips, signaling silence. Then he grabbed the human's sleeve with surprising strength, dragging him deeper, into the chamber. He pointed toward a hidden gap under the floorboards. The human hesitated only for a moment. Then he understood. This was how the child and his mother had survived until now, by hiding in the cracks of a broken world. They slipped into the dark space beneath the floor. It was cramped, damp, and filled with the smell of old earth. The boy pressed close, his small body trembling against the human's arm. Above them, the heavy boots thudded across the floor. Dust rained down, each step of the guards shaking the weak boards. The human's heart pounded, but his face stayed calm. He put a hand lightly over the boy's, steadying him. In that moment, the boy's fear began to ease. For the first time, he felt he was not alone in the dark. The guards lingered, their voices sharp. Then, slowly, the sound of boots faded. Silence returned. Only then did the boy crawl out, his chest rising and falling quickly. He looked at the human, his eyes wide with both fear and relief. The human climbed out as well, brushing dust from his clothes. He looked at the boy, then at the mother lying in the other room. He knew this was no accident. Someone wanted them gone. Someone wanted them broken. The boy whispered something again, his voice small but determined. Though the human did not understand the words, the meaning was clear. Help us. The human nodded slowly. The bond was no longer, just silent. It was growing, strong as stone. He could not turn away now. The ruins were no longer just a shelter. They had become the place where a promise was born. The human returned to the dim room where the alien mother lay. Her chest rose and fell slowly, each breath heavy with weakness. The boy sat beside her, holding her hand tightly as if he could keep her alive with his grip alone. When her eyes fluttered open, the human saw the faint glow of life still burning inside them. She looked at him. Her gaze was full of questions, and also fear. Who was this stranger? Why had he not left? Why? Had he not taken back the food and walked away like so many others? The boy whispered something in her ear. She turned her head slightly and studied the human again. For a moment, silence filled the air, broken only by the wind rattling the broken walls. Then she tried to speak. Her voice was faint, cracked, but steady. She spoke in her own alien tongue, words the human did not fully understand. Yet slowly, through gestures, through the boy's translation of broken words and signs, a story began to take shape. It was a story of loss. Once, they had lived in a small but peaceful village on the edge of the empire. The fields had been rich, the sky clear, the people kind. She had a husband, strong and proud, who worked the land. Their child had never gone hungry. Laughter had filled their nights. But war came. Not between humans and aliens, but between alien powers who treated small families like dust under their boots. Soldiers marched across the land, taking food, burning homes, crushing those who resisted. Her husband had stood to defend their door, but one strike from a soldier's weapon had ended his life. She told this part in broken words, her voice trembling, her eyes wet with silent tears. The boy lowered his head, as if trying not to remember. After that, everything had fallen apart. The mother had taken her son and run. They had wandered from place to place, but the cities did not want them. Other aliens turned them away. No one gave food, no one gave shelter. The Empire looked at them as trash, unworthy of help. The boy, still small, had learned to steal scraps to keep them alive. Every night he would search the alleys, hiding from guards, risking beatings. Every morning he returned to share whatever he found. She spoke with shame, but also pride. Her son had saved her more than once. But now she was weak. Too weak to walk. Too weak to work. The sickness of hunger had hollowed her bones, and she feared she would leave her son alone in this cruel world. Her voice broke as she whispered a final truth. She had begged the stars to let someone help him after she was gone. Not her, she had already accepted her fate. But him. The human listened in silence. His chest grew heavy with anger, not at her, but at the cruelty that had left them like this. He had heard of alien wars, of empires that crushed their own people. But here it was, alive before his eyes, the cost written on the face of a starving child and his dying mother. The boy looked at the human, his small hands clenched. His eyes burned with something stronger than fear. It was defiance. Even if the world abandoned them, he would not give up. The human's jaw tightened. He had seen enough battles to know courage when it stood in front of him, even in the form of a child. He felt something rise in his chest, something that whispered he could not just be a witness to this story. He had to be part of it. Then outside, voices broke the silence. Harsh, cruel voices, the sound of boots against stone. The boy jumped, his eyes wide. The mother's hand tightened around his. The human rose, moving quickly to the broken doorway. Through the cracks, he saw shadows moving closer, figures carrying weapons. The guards again, or worse. Their voices carried through the night, sharp and mocking. They spoke words the human did not understand, but their tone was clear. They were hunting. The mother's breath quickened. She whispered to her son, telling him to hide. But the boy shook his head, clinging to her hand, refusing to leave her side. His fear was not for himself. It was for her. The human stepped back inside, his face hard. He looked at the mother, then at the boy. In her weak eyes, he saw it. The silent plea. She did not ask for herself. She asked only one thing: protect him. The human nodded once. No words, no promises spoken aloud, but the fire in his eyes said everything. He moved toward the broken wall, his hand resting on the small knife at his belt. He had no armor, no great weapon, only his strength and his will. But sometimes, that was enough. The boy watched him, his small chest rising and falling quickly. The mother closed her eyes, whispering a prayer. The footsteps grew louder. The cruel voices drew nearer. The broken shelter, once hidden in the ruins, was no longer safe. The human stood tall in the dim light, ready. Whatever came through that doorway, he would face it. Not for himself, but for them. And in that moment, the story of a starving child and his weak mother became something greater. It became the story of a human who chose not to walk away. The air grew sharp with tension as the footsteps outside drew nearer. The alien mother clutched her son's hand tightly, whispering weak words of comfort. The boy's eyes were wide, filled with fear and anger at the same time. He wanted to fight, but his small body had no strength left. The human stood near the broken wall, listening carefully. He could hear the scrape of metal armor, the low laughs of soldiers who thought themselves hunters. These were not men coming to offer help. They were predators looking for prey. The doorframe shuddered as one of them kicked it. A harsh voice barked in an alien tongue, demanding whoever was inside to come out. The human did not move. His eyes narrowed. His hand gripped the small knife at his belt. Another voice followed, cruel and mocking. The words were foreign, but the tone was clear. They knew someone was hiding here. The boy pressed closer to his mother. She shook her head weakly, urging him to stay quiet. But the boy's small hand clenched into a fist. He looked at the human, silently begging him not to leave them. The door burst open with a loud crack. 2 guards stepped inside, their eyes glowing faintly under the shadows of their helmets. Their weapons gleamed, sharp and deadly. When their gaze fell on the mother and child, they smirked. One of them laughed darkly. But then their eyes shifted. They saw the human. Their laughter stopped. For a moment, silence filled the room. They had not expected him. The human stepped forward slowly, placing himself between the guards and the family. His stance was calm, but his eyes burned with steel. He said nothing, but his meaning was clear. You will not touch them. One of the guards barked a command. The other raised his weapon. The human moved fast. With a sharp strike, he slammed the first guard's weapon aside, the knife flashing in his hand. The alien stumbled back, surprised by the sudden resistance. The second guard swung, but the human ducked low, driving his shoulder into the attacker's chest. The impact sent the guard crashing into the broken wall, dust and stone falling around them. The boy gasped, clutching his mother tighter. His small eyes followed every move, filled with both fear and awe. The first guard roared and charged. The human twisted, catching the alien's arm and forcing it downward. The weapon clattered to the floor. In one swift motion, the human shoved the guard back, striking his jaw with the hilt of his knife. The alien staggered, dazed, but the fight was not over. The second guard rose from the rubble, fury blazing in his eyes. He lunged with a blade, aiming for the human's side. The human spun, the knife scraping across his arm but not deep enough to stop him. Pain flared, but he pushed it aside. He grabbed the guard's wrist, twisting hard. The alien screamed as the blade fell. With his other hand, the human slammed the guard against the wall again, the stones cracking from the impact. The room shook with the clash. Dust filled the air. The mother covered her child's eyes, but the boy pulled her hand away. He could not look away. For the boy, this was something new. He had always seen humans described as weak, as outsiders. But here was one standing like a wall between him and danger, fighting with nothing but strength, skill, and willpower. The guards, battered and humiliated, exchanged a glance. Their confidence wavered. This was not supposed to happen. Prey was supposed to cower, not fight back. And yet this human had pushed them to the edge. One of them spat a curse and retreated toward the door. The other followed, limping, rage in his eyes but fear in his steps. With one last glare, they vanished into the night, their footsteps fading into the distance. The human stood still, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Blood dripped from the shallow cut on his arm. He wiped it with the edge of his sleeve, his eyes never leaving the door until he was sure they were gone. Only then did he turn back. The boy stared at him, his small chest heaving. His eyes shone with something new. Respect. Not just relief, not just gratitude, but the spark of trust. The mother looked at him too, her weak face soft with both fear and hope. She whispered something, her voice trembling. The boy translated with simple words, broken but clear. She asks, "Why? Why you fight for us?" The human knelt, his face steady. He looked at the boy, then at the mother. His voice was calm but firm. "Because no one else will." The boy blinked. For a long time he said nothing. Then, slowly, he nodded. The human stood again, scanning the broken shelter. He knew the guards would return, and next time they would not come alone. Staying here was no longer safe. He looked back at the family. The mother was too weak to walk far. The boy was too small to carry her. That left only one choice. The human stepped closer, kneeling by the mother. Carefully, with gentle arms, he lifted her. She was light, far too light for a grown woman. The boy gasped, but then quickly followed, his small hands clutching the human's sleeve. The night outside was dark, filled with danger. But the human did not hesitate. He stepped into the shadows with the mother in his arms and the child at his side. The confrontation was over, but a greater journey had just begun. The human carried the alien mother carefully through the ruined streets. Her body was so light in his arms it felt as if she might disappear with the next cold wind. The boy ran beside him, his bare feet slapping against the broken stone. His small hand clung to the human's sleeve as if letting go meant losing everything. The city was quiet, but it was not safe. Shadows moved in distant alleys, whispers of danger in the dark. The human knew the guards would return. They would come in greater numbers, armed and ready to kill. Staying in the ruins was no longer an option. He moved quickly, guiding them, through side paths only he knew. His time as a traveler had taught him to find hidden routes, the places no soldier cared to watch. The boy followed silently, his eyes wide, always glancing back to make sure his mother was still breathing. Every breath from her was shallow, but it was still a breath. Finally, they reached a narrow metal door half buried under fallen stone. The human pushed it open with his shoulder, revealing a hidden passage. Rust covered the walls, and the air smelled damp, but it was safe for now. He carried the mother inside and lowered her gently onto an old blanket. The boy knelt beside her at once, pressing her hand to his face. He whispered in her ear, promising that she would live, that he had brought her to safety. The mother's lips trembled. She tried to speak, but only a faint whisper came out. The human unpacked his bag quickly. He had little, some food, a small water flask, and a few bandages. It was not enough, but it was something. He broke a ration bar into pieces and gave one to the boy, pointing at his mouth. The boy shook his head at first, but the human's eyes were firm. After a long pause, the boy obeyed, chewing slowly. The human then pressed water to the mother's lips. She swallowed weakly, and a small sound escaped her throat, almost like relief. For the first time, the heavy air in the room eased. The boy looked at the human, his dark eyes shining. He bowed his head slightly, an awkward but honest gesture of respect. For days, for months maybe, no one had shown them kindness. And now this stranger, this human, was protecting them like family. The human stayed silent, but inside, something burned. He had walked across many worlds, seen many alien faces, but none had touched him like this. The boy's courage, the mother's quiet strength, their unbreakable bond, these were things he could not ignore. As the mother rested, the boy crawled closer to the human. He tapped his chest and whispered his name in a broken, childlike voice. Then he pointed at the human waiting. The human smiled faintly. He spoke his own name softly. The boy tried to repeat it, his tongue stumbling over the sounds, but his smile showed he was proud. For the first time, a spark of warmth lit his thin face. Hours passed. The mother slept more peacefully now. The boy, though still weak, sat near the human, his eyes refusing to close. He watched the door as if guarding them, but his small body swayed with exhaustion. Finally, the human placed a hand gently on his shoulder. The boy blinked, then let his head rest against the man's arm. Within moments, he was asleep. The human stayed awake, listening to the faint drip of water and the distant hum of the ruined city above. He thought of the fight, of the guards' eyes when they saw him standing there. They would not forget. They would come back stronger. And yet, he also thought of the boy's small hand gripping his sleeve, of the mother's whisper asking only for her child to be saved. Those memories hardened his resolve. He had not chosen this fight, but it was his. Now, when the first pale light of dawn crept through the cracks, the human stood. He stepped outside quietly, scanning the horizon. Smoke rose from the distant city towers, and the sound of marching echoed faintly in the wind. Trouble was coming. But here, in this hidden refuge, something else was growing. Hope. The boy woke and stumbled out, rubbing his eyes. He looked at the human, then at the rising sun. His lips curled into the smallest smile, fragile but real. He pointed at the light as if to say, "We survived the night." The human nodded, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. Yes, they had survived. But surviving was not enough. He knew they needed more food, more water, more strength if they were to escape the city and find a place where they could live in peace. The mother stirred inside. Her eyes opened slowly, and when she saw her son standing safe in the sunlight, a tear slipped down her cheek. For the first time in many days, She allowed herself to believe she might live. The human returned to her side, kneeling. He spoke quietly, his words simple though she might not understand them all. "You are not alone anymore." She reached out a trembling hand and touched his arm. Her voice was faint, but one word carried clearly. It was the word her people used for protector. The human bowed his head, accepting the name. In that dark city full of cruelty, he had chosen a different path. A spark had been lit. Small, fragile, but bright enough to push back the shadows. And as the new day rose, the human knew this was only the beginning. The day moved slowly, heavy with silence. The hidden shelter gave them a little safety, but outside the ruined city still lived in fear. The boy stayed close to his mother, feeding her small pieces of food, holding the cup of water to her lips. Every time she swallowed, his eyes shone with relief. The human stood by the doorway, watching the streets beyond. His arm still ached from the cut he had taken, but he ignored the pain. His mind stayed sharp. The guards would not forget last night's fight. They would return with more soldiers. Time was short. The mother stirred, her weak voice calling the boy's name. He rushed to her side at once. She touched his face, her fingers trembling, then pointed toward the human. The boy looked at him, then back at her. Slowly, with halting words and gestures, he translated. She says, "You should leave. They will come. You will die if you stay." The human shook his head firmly. His eyes softened, but his voice was steady. "I will not leave you." The mother stared at him, confusion and fear mixing in her tired eyes. She had seen many pass by, strangers who turned their heads away. No one had ever stayed. Why would this one fight for them? The boy, though still young, understood. He stepped forward, standing between his mother and the human. His small voice trembled, but his words were clear. "If you stay, you are family." The human's heart tightened. He had not expected this bond, but he felt it deeply now. These two had nothing, yet they had given him trust. In return, he would give them what humanity always gave when all else was lost: loyalty and sacrifice. The sound of boots broke the moment. Heavy, marching boots, many this time. The human's head snapped toward the door. Shadows stretched across the street, long lines of soldiers moving closer. Their armor glinted in the morning light. Their voices were sharp, cruel, certain of victory. They were coming to finish what they had started. The boy froze, fear returning to his eyes. The mother whispered his name, pulling him close. The human's jaw tightened. He looked at the family once more, then stepped forward, placing himself between them and the danger outside. The soldiers spread through the ruins, their weapons ready. One barked an order, and the group moved toward the shelter. The human gripped his knife tightly. He was only one man, but he was enough. The first soldier entered, his weapon raised. The human struck fast, disarming him with a single blow and sending him crashing to the ground. The others rushed in, but the narrow doorway blocked them. The human fought like a storm, his movements sharp and unyielding. Every strike was fueled not by anger, but by purpose. The boy watched with wide eyes, his heart pounding. He wanted to scream, but he stayed silent, holding his mother close. The clash shook the shelter. Weapons fell, shouts rang out, and dust filled the air. The human fought fiercely, but he knew they could not stay here forever. The soldiers would keep coming. Then above the noise, a new sound echoed, a deep mechanical hum. The human's eyes flicked upward. From the sky, a ship descended slowly, its engines burning bright. It was his ship, hidden until now, summoned by a signal he had sent before the fight began. The soldiers froze, staring upward. The ship's shadow fell over the ruins like a warning. The human used the moment. With swift force, he drove the remaining guards back, then turned to the boy. "Now!" he called. The boy understood. He pulled, his mother's arm over his shoulder, struggling with her weight. The human rushed forward, lifting her into his arms once again. Together they ran from the broken shelter, the boy holding tightly to his side. The soldiers shouted, firing their weapons, but the ship's engines roared. A bright beam of light cut across the ground, forcing them back. The human climbed aboard with the family, pulling the hatch closed behind them. Inside, the air was cleaner, warmer. The boy collapsed to his knees, clutching his mother's hand. She breathed weakly, but her eyes opened, filled with tears of relief. The human stood at the controls, his face calm but fierce. The ship rose into the sky, leaving the ruins and the soldiers far below. The boy looked at him, his small voice breaking. "You saved us." The human turned, his gaze softening. "No," he said quietly. "You saved each other. I only gave what I could." The boy shook his head, his eyes full of emotion. "You gave more. You gave hope." The mother's voice was faint, but strong enough to carry one word, the same word she had whispered before. "Protector." The human bowed his head slightly. It was not a title he had asked for, but it was one he would carry with honor. The ship climbed higher, breaking through the gray clouds. Below, the city shrank into the distance, its cruelty left behind. Ahead stretched the endless stars, dark, unknown, but filled with possibility. The human glanced at the boy and his mother. They were weak, fragile, but alive, and alive meant hope. He spoke softly, almost to himself, but the boy heard. "This is humanity's gift. Not weapons, not war. It is the choice to stand, to fight, to protect, even when no one else will." The boy's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not only of fear, they were of belief. The stars shone brighter as the ship moved forward, carrying with it a new story of a child, a mother, and a human who chose compassion over indifference. The galaxy would not remember the soldiers who hunted the weak, but it would remember this, one act of humanity, shining in the dark.